now I start recording because
Okay.
I don't want to lose anything. So Mark, I will do a little bit of the presentation.
Okay.
I start with the topic.
Okay.
Let me check before trailer. How is the weather?
Oh, it's a warm day, so I'm doing yard work after this.
Ooh. Yeah, all right. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Joker Podcast. And this evening we have a very special guest. Let me introduce him right away. In 1990, three people were driving through Vienna on their way to Gen Con. One of them was looking out the window at that grey industrial city, and in that moment, I think, conceived a game where you play the creature of the night, haunted by your own hunger, struggling to hold on to your humanity. A game about being the monster. That person was Mark Rein-Hagen, and that game became Vampire Masquerade. And this evening, after a little bit of a struggle in these days, we have him on our podcast. Hi, Mark. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's begin straight away with the question. Um, are you home now or still at your mom's place?
Oh no, I'm at home.
Okay. I'll call this Texas right now.
Sorry?
I'll call this Texas right now.
No, I'm in Minnesota.
Oh, Minnesota. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And so for us, it's pretty warm, but by most people's standards, this is not warm. It's warm enough to go outside with just a hat and the sweater. So for me, and it's sunny, so I'll take it. But yeah, we can't plant anything yet. It's still pretty cold.
Just to begin, my listeners, my viewers, know you mainly through Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness. What would you want to them to know about your work that they might not be aware of?
Um, I guess that I started with the game called Ars Magica. That I'm still working on games. I have a game coming up called Fang Night, which is basically a fantasy world of darkness, where we're starting with vampires. Then we're doing the Badlanders, which are kind of like a hunters, and then we're doing our werewolf game. And so it'll be a whole. It's a. I've always loved fantasy, and I had this is based on my original D&D campaign from when I was a kid, and so I've been working on it for 50 years almost, and it just is really fun. We've been working on it now for I guess 7 years, so a long time. And I think it's going to be one of the most detailed, intricate, beautiful fantasy worlds ever done. But it has a horror vibe to it. It's called Lost Lorn, and basically it's a purgatory for people on Earth who died, and they're neither good enough to go to heaven or evil enough to go to hell. So they come here to Lost Lord. So it's kind of a mixed world, and I'm kind of obsessed with all of our cousins.
Seems like Italy.
So yeah, well, Italy's in there. It's got we use kind of a map of the ancient map of the world. That sort of pictured the Mediterranean in the middle of the world, and then they had the Africa and Europe and Asia kind of wrapped around the Mediterranean. That's kind of the map we're using a little bit, where the Mediterranean is the center of the world, and it sort of wrapped. So that way we can use a lot of real world countries, which people kind of do anyway, right? Like Westeros is basically all the different countries of Europe, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is, of course, we're going to be using Europe, right? That's kind of the conceit of Western fantasy in a lot of ways. So how do you make sense out of that? How do you do that and have it make sense and seem realistic and seem like a real world, which I think is key to fantasy. It has to be grounded, right? It's key to horror too. It needs to be grounded. It needs to feel tangible and real, and that's what brings home the wonder of fantasy or the horror of dark fantasy.
Italy had an enormous vampire law, uh, large scene in the 90s and in the 20s. Did you ever interact with the Italian community?
In the 90s, I didn't spend much time in Italy. I came through on a personal level, but yeah, I didn't know anyone back in the 90s, and I was very busy working on my own stuff and working on the TV show. So I wish I had been there. That would have been awesome. I was always amazed though, like I could go almost anywhere in the world, and if I went to the park,
Are you
you
planning
know,
to? Yeah.
I could find vampire players. I had a girlfriend once, and we're driving cross country from New York to San Francisco, and we're leaving New York, and she goes, "So tell me," she didn't really know much about gaming, and she goes, "So you do this vampire game? I know that. I read your Wikipedia, but what is it?" And I go, "Oh, actually, it's Friday. I bet." And I pull off the highway somewhere in Ohio, and we just drive around town. I pull over a cop. I go, "Hey, is there a park around here where kids dressed in black are playing this weird game?" And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, it's this park over here." And we drive up and we pull in, and she's amazed, and these kids are going crazy because it's me. And I just found a LARP in the middle of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
And because on Friday night, at least in America, I don't know if in Italy they play on a Friday night, but it was very common to play Friday night vampire. So I just found a game just by asking a cop.
Um, did you ever visit Italy for example, for researching about art magic?
When I was a kid, I grew up in Scotland.
Oh,
So as a kid, I have a very European mindset, and as a kid, every summer we would travel around Europe, right? And so we would just take our car and we'd go camping. My parents didn't have a lot of money, so but we would just go camping all over Europe, and sometimes just sleeping in the car. And those are some of my best memories. So yeah, I have. And then, of course, we'd always be buying books and reading about the places. So I grew up in a household that was full of books, a lot of them picture books. So I knew all the different. My father was a minister, a Lutheran minister. So we would visit castles because I insisted on visiting castles and cathedrals. So I knew all of the historical things, and I knew, So when we went to Florence, I knew quite a bit about the history of Florence, and yeah, it was Tuscany, of course, all of Tuscany, Bologna. I don't know how you say it in Italian.
Bologna. 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 Yes.
Bologna, yeah. We never made it to the south of Italy, but we pretty much traveled through the north pretty well. Yeah, so I had I was young, but I remember it, right? I remember
Uh,
it very well.
I'm very curious. What someone who created an entire Gothic universe is actually consuming? What are you reading or watching right now?
Um, I've been watching The Pit. I don't normally watch medical shows, but I love it. I'm watching Rooster. I just finished watching an episode of Rooster, which is about a writer who is in a college campus, which is very funny. What else am I watching? Let me open it up. I'm probably gonna watch Wuthering Heights tonight. I watched Catch 22 last night.
Yes,
Yeah.
very interesting.
I'm rereading because I'm writing a science fiction novel. So I'm rereading Project Hail Mary. I just saw the movie. I loved it. I saw it twice in the theater. I never do that.
Is it a
Never
good
watch.
movie?
Oh, I love it. Great. I love the book too. I'm rewatching The Green Knight. It's a great fantasy movie. What else? Yeah, I do a lot of writing with a movie on
Ah,
or a TV show on, right? It's
very
like kind of
interesting.
noise. And
But it's
so
but it's
I'm the
like
classic.
white noise,
Yeah, it's white noise, and so I have to watch it a couple times, because I miss a lot, But if it's not a really serious, I wouldn't watch Dune while writing. I'm gonna watch it, right? But there's some things, more TV shows, you know, especially cheaper TV shows like Jack Reacher. Like if I'm watching that, I can do that while writing, right? Because I just look up for the key plot points. But storytelling is such a big part of my life. I'm trying to keep up on how storytelling trends and how stories are being told, how characters are being portrayed. Because I'm always thinking about, like when I wrote Vampire, I was always thinking about how would this be as a movie or a TV show, right? It was always written to be a role playing game, but also as a media property. And that was my great disappointment is that we got that TV show and it didn't go anywhere, and I kind of stopped it. All these other vampire properties have done very well, but Vampire never was, right? And so it was just a darn shame.
But taking back to 1987, you are a student at St. Olaf College. You co-found Lion Rampant with Jonathan Swift, and you designed Ars Magica in 9 months. What was the central idea you were chasing? And correct me
We
if
were
I'm wrong with the date, with the time.
we had it all started with a conversation we're having about how bad the magic system in D&D was, especially back then. I think it's better now, but it's still not great, and it's very Vancian. You forget the spell when you cast it, and it's very mechanical. So it takes something that should be magical. Literally, it's a magic system. It should feel magical, and it's not. It feels like you're pulling these superpowers out of your pocket, And we said, well, how could if you were to design a role playing game? I think it's I who asked it. How would we do it? How would we do it? And we sort of figured out the noun verb thing of combining a noun and a verb to create magic, and the idea you can do spontaneous magic, and that could be based on this sort of all these examples that are established spells, which are the formulaic spells, but then you can also do off the cuff whatever you want, which we later on used in Mage and the Vampire in the World of Darkness, right? That off the cuff magic, which is so flexible and reality bending and so fun. And I was like, well, let's write a game. And Jonathan was like, let's write a letter to TSR and ask them if they want our game. And I was like, oh, that's not a good idea. They're never going to do our game. But he insisted. So we wrote a letter to them offering them our game, which I get these letters now. And it's like, it's very silly when as a nobody to write a letter to a company asking them to publish your game, right? It's just not going to work. Of course, we never got a reply. And the deal was, if they didn't reply for 2 months, then we would write our Magic ourselves and publish it. And I'd always been very entrepreneurial. I always had little companies I was running and, doing stuff. And I basically, we're starting a company. And so Lisa Stevens, who owns Paizo now, was part of the initial group. John Nephew, who owns Atlas Games, was part of the initial group. Nicole Lindrews is part of Green Goblin. No, I forgot. Oh, she's gonna kill me. I forgot the name of her company. It's a pretty big company based in Seattle. And we basically went to town and we started. And of course, Jonathan, who went on to design third edition D&D, and we basically started a company. And back then, it was very hard to do. There was no Kickstarter. There was no figuring out. There's no instruction tutorials. There was no websites to tell you how to do it. Like you had to go to a convention and talk to someone. Hey, how do you print your books? And luckily I had some experience in printing because I owned a small company that used to print. I would hand set type a little tiny printing machine, and I did some smaller print projects. So I had some experience, and basically figured it out step by step. And the first edition of Ars Magica was very, very bad, very poorly designed, terrible art, real basic cover, some really clunky writing. But that summer I went to every game convention I could that was within like 6 hours of my house, and I just started building up a fan, fans one by one by one, literally play testing people one by one by one. And by the way, that experience of having to gain fans one by one, with or 6 by 6, because that's how many people you can have in a group at a convention. I was like, okay, that's not going to work. And that's what made me realize, okay, someday I need to do a game that's also a LARP, because that way I can go to convention, I can have hundreds of people playing the game, and I can win over fans hundreds at a time. And so that's the only way to get really big, I figured, and indeed that's one reason why I wasn't really invited to any conventions in Italy, but I was invited to many conventions in Brazil and UK, France, and I would go Australia, and I would just go there and by myself. Like in Brazil, I was running LARPs with thousands of people by myself, one person by myself. I once ran a LARP with like 3,000 people playing. And all I did is I had a megaphone. I'd say, anyone who wants to be Bruja, stand over there. Anyone who wants Torador, stand over there. I go, Eddie Torador, you hate them because they stole your thing, and you hate them because they stole. And then I had all the different groups, and then they just ran around, and I was being followed by a TV crew, and that's one reason why I think Vampire still like the most popular RPG in Brazil is that it had such a big launch, that it became this phenomenon, and LARP did
The idea for Vampire came to you on the road, correct me if I'm wrong, to Gen Con in 1990, driving through Gary with
that. Yep.
Stuart Wick and Lisa Stevens. Can you walk me through that moment?
Yeah, I was basically had been working with for a few years, trying to figure out a new game to design, and I was working on a game called Inferno, and it was basically where you play someone who's in hell, someone your character's someone famous who's in hell. And one day we were playtesting. I was in front of the fireplace. We had a gas fireplace in the house. I was standing in front of it. I am the great Lord Asmodeus, and I welcome you. So, we just started playtesting. And suddenly there's a crash outside. And I run outside, and there's a pizza delivery Domino's truck that had rolled down the hill. He forgot to put his brake on. He was this immigrant kid, probably 17, just got his license, didn't know what he was doing. Forgot to put his brake on, and it rolled into the transformer at the bottom of my driveway, and it blew up all the lights in our house. And he was in his car. By the time I got there, he's opened his car and was trying to start it. I go, dude, get out of your car. Get out of your car. And I finally had to drag him out of his car. And about 5 minutes later, sometimes I say right away, but to make myself look good, but it was 5 minutes later, the gas tank exploded and the car went up in flames, and every light in the entire subdivision went out. Like hundreds and hundreds of houses were affected. And it wrecked all of our phones. It blew up all of our computers, our fax machine, everything electronic in the house was gone. Right? And so I spent with a borrowed phone, I spent the next 3 days negotiating with Domino's to get the restitution money quickly. So I made a deal where we got less money, but we got it right away. And that was enough to keep the company going. We bought new computers, new equipment. We got going, but I was like, that's it for Inferno. I'm not doing this anymore. So I was looking for a new game, right? And also Inferno wasn't right. I knew it from the beginning. It's just not that interesting. It's not going to be a huge seller, right? A lot of people don't want to play a character in hell. It's fun as a one shot, maybe, but you wouldn't want to play this over and over again, right? So I was looking around for a good idea, a big idea, and so and by the way, this is called the Wraith Curse in White Wolf history. That basically any kind of game connected with Inferno or Afterlife, whether it's Inferno or Wraith, it was a curse. Like when I was working on Wraith, my computer went dead and I lost the entire manuscript on the hard drive, and my saved copy was junk as well. So I'd saved it on Faithful and a hard disk, an outside hard disk, but that went bad too. So we had to have it sent to a company, and they fixed the corruption, and then I had to go in and anyway, it's a whole thing. So anyway, on the way past, Gary, I said out loud, "Oh, this is like a place where vampires would hang out. This is so horrible." And then I remembered back when I saw the vampire movie in the movie theater with the kids in the beach. I forgot the name right now. What's it called? Lost Boys. We were watching Lost Boys, and on the way out of the theater with my sister and Jonathan Tweet, he goes, "It'd be fun to have a role-playing game about vampires. If only you didn't have to just fight vampires all the time. It'd be really boring to just fight vampires." Because that's the mentality back then, right? was a game about vampires, you were obviously going to be fighting vampires. And I said to him and my sister, I will figure this out someday. I will figure it out. And so then I remembered that conversation while we were driving my Gary, and I go, oh, the answer to that I've been looking for all this time is that you are fighting vampires, but you are a vampire. So you're the enemy is yourself.
Illumination.
So and so it's Illuminati, it's mafia. You know, the vampires control everything, and they're a constant war with each other. And then I thought, and they're fighting werewolves. But and so people in the car didn't quite get it as I explained it, but they could see I was very excited, and I knew it would work. That basically I would just divide the vampires up into so many different factions that hated each other and were rivals, and they were competing to control the world secretly. So it'd be like an Illuminati style, mafia style game, right? And that they have the advantage of being immortal, which is a huge advantage, obviously. Um, and I started designing, and that Gen Con, I didn't go to any parties. I even has the booth. I was sitting at the back of the booth in my notebook, and I just filled up notebook after notebook after notebook, and the ideas just flowed out of me. I'd been spending so long trying to look for a new game, had all these ideas built up of how I wanted to do my next game, how I want to do a game my way, storytelling. I knew that already. I knew it was going to be storytelling based. I knew it was going to be based on the D10 because I love D10s. They're beautiful. They look like gems. I knew it was going to be very simple rules. That story would come first, rules second. Yep. I knew it was going to be dots because I know I had already figured out that people are math phobic. And if you want to get a wide audience, and I knew that I wanted girls to play. So I knew I had to make it something that, because girls weren't in role playing yet. And I knew if I could bring girls in, that I would have the biggest game in no time, because any game girls are playing, boys would play too, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to be a cool game. I want to be a game that you would be proud to have on your table. Like D&D, like we had girls come over, we would never leave our D&D books on the table. Oh my gosh. You would look like such dorks back in the 90s, right? 80s especially. You would hide that stuff, right? If you had girls coming over, you would hide it. And I wanted to make a game books that were so beautiful and cool looking that you would proudly leave them out. And so I had all these ideas of what I wanted to do. And so once I had that idea of, oh, you play a vampire and you're fighting vampires, boom, it just was like a rush. And I finished that game so quickly because it was all waiting. I'd already spent so many years thinking about how I wanted to do my next game that the two things came together, and I sort of just knew what to do.
Vampire was sold out within a week of release in 1991. What was the room like when that call came in from the distributor?
Well, excuse me, I have allergies. It wasn't just one call; it was many calls. But yeah, I mean, you have to understand at that point I was very, very poor. I had no money. I was living off of day old donuts and ramen noodles. I didn't have a car. I had a bike. We didn't have a washing machine in the group house we lived in. I lived on a sofa in my office, sometimes on the floor. I had to ride a bike to wash my clothes and to go shopping, and it wasn't close. So I went from being extremely poor, really struggling, to suddenly I was, yeah. I remember going to Dragon Con, was the first convention we went to after the release, and a vampire band had formed based on vampire or inspired by vampire. They played, and the crowd picked me up and carried around like I was a rock star. And I was like, holy crap, what's going on? And then going to Gen Con that year, it was like night and day. Like there's so many women at our booth, and so many women at Gen Con. which had never been the case before. Like before that, there had never been many women at Gen Con. And it was just like, okay, something's happening here. And, and so within a few months, I had a car. I had enough money to buy beer, and I realized we were riding a wave, a big wave.
Vampire is described as a game of personal power, but the world of darkness is also deeply political. The Camarilla, the Sabbath, the Anarch, the hierarchy of ancient. How did you balance in the game the personal and the political?
I mean, the political is personal, right? Like the reason people do evil things is because they, in politics, is because, power corrupts, right? Like J.D. Vance said, I'm totally against involvement in foreign wars. And yet, his need for power and his desire to become president means he has to stand behind Trump no matter what, right? And so he gave up on these values, right? Like that. And now his friends who are all, or people who are no war feel betrayed by him, right? But this is an old thing in politics. There's nothing new with this. Happens over and over again in politics, right? And so that's where the personal comes in, is that you're making these political decisions, and in so doing, ensuring you getting more power, but you're also betraying your own values and your own self. And so by juxtaposing these two things, this is really getting at some very Shakespearean ideas of that conflict. Think about Hamlet. Think about Macbeth. Where the striving for power conflicts with the desire to be good and do right by at least by your family, but if not, and your friends. But then sometimes you betray a friend or family to get the power. So this is all very, very human stuff. I suspect when we meet alien species, we'll find out this is universal to all conscious life forms, right? That this, that betray that how betrayal and politics works. How the prisoner's dilemma. I love these. I love game theory, and I think game theory really captures a lot of what goes on in politics and in storytelling about power. That you're making these very difficult decisions, and so it's very easy to talk yourself into this is the right thing. I'm a good person. I haven't changed my mind. I've always thought this, and of course, it's not true. But we talk ourselves into it.
Being the vampire was a theoretical concept, a theoretical idea, but the Masquerade is another theoretical idea. The central fiction that vampires maintain to hide from humanity. The Masquerade gives the game its name and its central thematic sense. Where did that concept come from?
Well, I knew from the beginning that I had to, like my theory of game design and storytelling is that if you have a problem, you need to turn the problem into an advantage. You don't need to find a way around the problem. You need to make that problem an advantage in your story or your setting. So the idea of the Masquerade was to solve the problem of, well, if these vampires are so powerful, how come they don't exist in the real world? Why do people not believe in vampires? And I was like, okay, well, they don't believe in vampires because vampires work very, very hard to make people not believe in them. They spend a lot of time and money, and they have these laws. Oh, laws. Well, I always know that, I think a lot of game designers back then didn't know it, but I always felt that giving your players rules was really fun because what do players love to do? They love to break the rules,
Yeah.
So if you give them really rules that are high risk, like if you break this, you could be killed. Then breaking it is even more fun, right? And it's a role playing game, so you want to have all these rules, which is why I invented the traditions. Of course, is that they're in terms of storytelling, they're rules that are players are meant to break, or characters are meant to break, right? And so that makes them interesting and fun, and players love that stuff. So I turned what could have been a disadvantage into a huge advantage, a huge part of the setting, and it became this sort of drum. But also, it was just required. I had to do something, as I wanted to be the real world, right? I wanted this to be, because I figured if people could play in their own city, it would take away a lot of the problems of a lot of role-playing games, that people were not imagining the same plays. Like, the problem with doing a fantasy world is most people don't know how medieval society actually looked like. Like, in most role-playing D&D games at the time, people portrayed fantasy villages like suburbia, right? It didn't make any sense. And I'm always, I read a lot of history. I knew what real medieval times were like, and I would try to make it more realistic. And people were like, "Well, that's not weird, Why can't the serf just come with me?" Well, he's bound to the land. The serf can't leave the land. They're bound to the land. They're not free. Well, I'm going to free the serfs. Oh, okay, fine. Right, you know what I mean? It gets the whole. But anyway, so Vampire was going to be set in a version of the real world in your own city, so that it would just take care of all these problems of trying to imagine a place. And then it's also just fun from the play testing, right? Like, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. So the play testing that we did, I would say, okay, you go to this club. Well, we'd all been to that club. We all knew where the bathroom was. We all knew where the bars were, where the dance floors were, right? We knew that place, or the coffee shop or the church, right? We knew where things were. So it makes it so much easier to play in the real world. But to play in the real world, then you have to explain, well, how are vampires invisible? And then, of course, having vampires be invisible, that's really cool, right? That's fun. Like, secret lords of controlling the world, they're vampires. The Illuminati are vampires. That's cool, right? That's a really fun idea. And Anne Rice had never done that, right? Like, no one had ever done that before. The idea of vampires being the Illuminati controllers of the world, and there being this hidden level. And then as the other games came out, it became clear vampires weren't the only Illuminati. There's all these monstrous beings controlling the world and competing with each other. There's all these hidden levels to the world. And I think a lot of the what they call urban horror books, the fantasy genre, I think a lot of that is born out of World of Darkness. That idea of this horror, this hidden levels of the world. But I mean, of course, some of those ideas I obviously got from Call of Cthulhu, which has that idea of the hidden world. And of course, it goes older than that. But in a modern setting, that's definitely was me. But it felt very natural. That wasn't a big step, right? That was pretty obvious to me.
Please correct me if I'm wrong. The clans are one of the most beloved elements of Vampire, but you have said, if I remember well, they weren't in the original design. Chris McDonough suggested them late in the playtesting. What was the game like before the clan existed?
I mean, Chris McDonough loves to say that, but we did one playtest. We did one playtest without the clans, and then we had a debriefing afterwards. And people said we should have a character classes, and I said I don't want to do character classes, but I am going to do something. And I already had something in mind, but at that point I hadn't developed it yet. But I knew that I didn't want to do character classes, but I did want to do something that was real in the world. And I always hated character classes. It's not a real thing in the world, right? Like, there's not an actual fighters guild, right? Or at least with D&D back then, it was a game contrivance, not a setting, real thing in the setting. So I knew I was going to do some sort of thing that was real in the setting. Factions, all right? I knew I was going to do factions, and factions would be a big part of your game. But at that point, the play test we had done was they weren't even vampires yet. And that play test, they were becoming vampires. So, that was the whole thing. So I had planned for it later. But having it basically become both a faction and a character class in a way, that was definitely something that evolved. I realized that it would be much more fun if these political factions, the clans, were also where your powers came from and where your advancement came from, and that it's a package deal. It's both your faction and it's your how you rise through the ranks, basically.
Talking
How
about,
you go.
please,
Go ahead.
Okay. Talking about clans. Um, each clan has not just mechanical abilities, but a specific curve. The Nosferatu disfigurement, the Malkavian madness, the Vermeer's blood bond to the clan. Why is the curse so integral?
I mean, you know, it's the number one rule of storytelling, right? Every character is defined more by their weakness than by their strength. And so if you're going to have, and I can't, I tried, I believe, in Ars Magica to have like a list of things people could pick from for their wizard, and they could do it, but that didn't feel quite right, because it's just, people just sort of pick something and it wasn't integral and it wasn't part of the social thing. It was just an individual thing. And they would often forget about it. But I realized if I made the weakness something that was part of their clan, they would be reminded of it when they met with other members of their clan, right? And so it would be reinforced, and it would be something that was very integral to the setting because it was so a big a part, and it unites the clan as well. Like, if you're Malkavian, you're all a little bit crazy, right? If you're all Ventrue, you're all power hungry. If you're Nosferatu, you're all disfigured, and so that unites you in a way. Having a flaw unites you, but it was obvious to me that role playing games, especially back then, left a huge tool on the table and wasn't using this huge tool, which is character flaws. Character flaws, if you take any kind of writing course, your teacher will tell you your characters all need flaws, right? This is the key part of storytelling. The character is defined more by their flaws than by their strengths. And role playing at that time completely did not do that. It still doesn't really do it, which I think is crazy.
Talking about craziness and the Malkavians. The Malkavians are perhaps the most controversial clan. Vampires whose madness is both their discipline and their code. What was the intent behind them? And, how do you feel about our players interpreting that?
Players, I don't think interpreted it the way I kind of wanted them to, but they had fun with it, so I don't really care. But I all the way through high school and college, I worked at a mental hospital as an orderly, as they called it back then, a human services technician, an HST. So basically, I would work in wards that had people with behavior problems. So my specialty, because I was a wrestler in high school, I would basically hold people in basket holds and stop them from harming themselves and others. So I basically was fighting people who had mental illness, and from that, I gained a feeling that mental illness is something that everyone has. It's just a matter of degree, right? So I believe there's not just an autism spectrum, but there's an ADHD spectrum. There's a dyslexia spectrum. There is a misophonia spectrum, right? There's a hallucinations, schizophrenic spectrum. And we're all in these spectrums in different ones. And if you're low in all these spectrums, that in itself is a mental illness because it makes you so flat and so modulated that can be a problem in sort of living life and experiencing things. And I've never done therapy, but I love books about therapy. I love talking to therapists. I love reading about therapy, and I think everyone, you can just tell from therapy, everyone has problems, right? Everyone probably could use therapy, and so unless they have friends and they're able to work through things themselves, and there's this depression spectrum, right? And so I wanted to put Malkavians in there to sort of get at, because back in the 90s, talking about mental health was not something you did, right? If you had any mental problems, you would pretend you didn't have them, right?
Why?
And if your friends had them, you would basically try to not talk about it and avoid it. It was sort of very scary to people. And so people would always come to me because I would always be very open about talking about mental health. I worked in the hospital, everyone knew that. And people would come to me with their problems, whether it was them or their families were going through something. And I would always say, hey, it's normal. Going through mental health problems is normal. You shouldn't overreact to it. Like if your father, is having problems with his mental health, don't be so freaked out that you're gonna alienate him. Just understand he's going through something, right? So the Malkavians were meant to solve that. And people use it much more like a storytelling trope. It's kind of funny, haha. But I didn't really mean it like that. I didn't mean it to be funny. But people get to do what they want, right? It's role playing. I don't have control over it. So I understand that some people are critical of the Malkavians now, and they try to fix the new edition and blah blah blah. But I think it wasn't ever meant to be in any way a slight against people with mental health issues. It was meant to sort of get people talking about mental health and open up the conversation and let people explore it a little bit. Um, Unfortunately, some players, you know, made it into a joke, and in some LARPs that bothered other people, right? But there's always going to be that problem in a LARP, right? There's always going to be that problem in role playing that someone says something that someone else is bothered by, and you know, as game designers, what can you do really? Do you just not deal in controversy? Well, that's what some game designers do. They don't have anything that's controversial in their games. Anything. They strip it out. They have special readers who come in and just take out anything that could be controversial. And I don't believe in that. I think that you want to give as many different tools as you can, and you want to deal with life and what it is to be human as realistically as you can. And if that gets you in trouble, then that gets you in trouble. Because everything can get you in trouble, right? Everything. Everything can get you in trouble.
You said that Vampire was also one of the first role-playing games to have a substantial female player base. In your opinion, why did it reach women when most role-playing games
Back then, there was a substantial group of women who were goths. Goth at its sort of a punk had transitioned into goth. And so I knew the subculture of goth girls was there. And I knew that a lot of gamer girls were on the periphery of the gaming world. We always had girls in our gaming groups, usually just one or two at a time. But I knew that they would be kind of interested in something that was romantic. And I also knew that the number one fans of Anne Rice were women, right? Like the Vampire Chronicles, their fan base was women, mostly women and gays, right? Some straight men, but mainly women and gays. And so I was very, very, very focused on winning them over, both women and gays, into it. And so I try to make it as friendly as possible. First of all, to the non-gamers. So that's why we have dots, right? A page full of numbers is not scary to me and most gamers, right? A page with numbers everywhere. But you give that to a non-gamer, a page full of numbers, that is scary to them because they are scared of numbers because they had a hard time in math class. Many, many people did. And it looks like a math test. But a page full of dots? No, that's not scary. And so that was one of the key decisions I made. The cover being romantic and abstract, the art being cool, and the rules being very simplified compared to most role playing games. The story first, the rules second. The front of the book doesn't have rules; it has a story, right? All these decisions were designed to make it so that the non-gamer, and by non-gamer I meant people who up to then hadn't really been playing role-playing games, could be introduced to this world in a way that didn't scare them.
Um, Talking about the storyteller system uses pools of details rather than a single die. That's, uh, that's an unusual choice. Why details and why pools?
Well, pools were big back then because of Shadowrun, and Dowd had some experience with pools, and I was like, I wanted to do something different. I think in hindsight, it was a mistake. I think what I'm doing with Fang Night, of using D20 but making it a storytelling version of D20, it would have been the better choice. But back then, we were just all trying so hard to not be D&D and do something different, that I wanted to do something, and so that's basically why I did the pools. But the pools are also fun. You get to roll lots of dice, right? D6s don't actually roll very well, even though they're the most common kind of dice. They don't roll well, but D10s roll very well, but they also stop. Like a D20 doesn't stop very easily, right? It tends to keep rolling right off the table.
Right off the table, yeah.
But practically speaking, a D10 rolls and shakes very well in your hands, and then when it falls to the table, it rolls a little bit but stops very quickly. So it's easier to roll than a D6, but rolls less than the table than a D20. It's the perfect dice, really, and also it's decimal, right? And so I immediately go, okay, well, I can make the 0 be both, good and bad, and the 1 could be something, and I'll play with this. And so that's kind of where we came up. Tom Dowd did the math for me. Back then, I wasn't able to do as much math, and we sort of figured out a basic system. So, but it was meant to be. My goal for Vampire, which is not how people end up playing it, was that you wouldn't have big combats, right? You would roll once or twice for shooting your gun or whatever, and then the combat would be over, right? It was meant to be like you roll once or twice a scene, maybe 3 times a scene, and then it would be over. That's my style of gaming, and I just assumed everyone would do what I did. So I didn't realize that people would be doing combat where they were rolling these big pools of dice 20 times, 20 turns in a row. It didn't occur to me that people would do that, which is foolish of me. Of course, I should have known. But the way I played it is that my combats were 3 turns long at most.
Mark, Kindred the Embrace, the Fox TV adaptation in 1996, was produced by Aaron Sterling and ran for 8 episodes before being canceled. You said in the beginning of this process that you were unhappy with the finished product. What went wrong in your opinion?
They try to make it a cop show to appeal to the average audience, and I think that was a mistake. I think we didn't need the cop characters that distracted from the vampire stuff going on. And also, as I pointed out earlier, this is about an Illuminati type powerful people. Like, how could cops survive? Everyone who's played vampire knows cops can't fight vampires, right? Vampires can roll right over cops. They're more powerful, and plus they could just call the boss, the mayor, and say, get these cops off the case right now. At least if you're if you have any power, if you anyone that where vampires are controlling the cops, for most vampires, cops are not an issue. So, and also it's just a little bit cheesy. It was a little bit Fantasy Island, and I think if Mark Frankel hadn't died in a motorcycle accident, and by the way, his son now is in Game of Thrones, uh, um, the new series, looks just like him. If he hadn't died, I think we would have brought back, and I think the show could have evolved and become better. Because there's definitely some talk of bringing it back. So it wasn't canceled; it was actually, it just hadn't been renewed. So there's still a chance for it to be renewed, and we were hoping, we were waiting every day to hear it was renewed, and then Mark died. And without Mark, there's absolutely no reason to go on with the show. He was amazing. He was the best part of that show by far.
Let's go a little beyond that. Let's talk about the werewolf the Apocalypse, 1992. It has an ecological dimension that feels almost prescient today. Werewolves as defenders of a dying natural world against corporate corruption. Where did that concept come from?
I mean, I was always I love nature. I've always been a hiker, love canoeing. I love exploring the natural world. I love being outside. I would love if my office could be outdoors. So I'd have to be if I could be outdoors all the time, I would be outdoors all the time. It's perfect for me. I love outdoors. Even if it's too cold or too hot, I love being outside. Um, and I've always been an environmentalist, and I've always sort of felt like, even back in the 80s, I knew about global warming, and I would talk to people nonstop about it, and they would be like, "What's global warming? That's stupid. That makes no sense." Because remember, back in the 80s and 90s, no one had heard of it, right? And but I knew all about it, and I knew it was coming, and it was really scary to me. So anyway, I knew I wanted to make a game at some point that had environmentalism as a theme, and along with environmentalism is a certain anti-corporate ethos, right? If you ever read, do you ever hear of an author, Edward Abbey? He wrote the Chainsaw Gang, where they go around cutting down billboards with chainsaws and blowing up dams. And I love Edward Abbey and his books, and I was like, oh, it's a cool vibe. So it's kind of like the Chainsaw Gang, only they're werewolves and they're going around fighting. It's like Earth First, right? I was a member of Earth First back in the day. Where you're basically, running, trying to save the whales by stopping whale boats from shooting their harpoons. Getting between the whale. Brave, right? That's insanely brave. An obscene number of Earth First people have been killed or gone missing. Right? They're very brave trying to save nature. And I believe you need extremists like that. So anyway, I was sort of I don't agree with all Earth First tactics, but I was like, okay, Earth First, Edward Abbey, and then when I got to werewolf, I was like, okay, here's where I do it. This is the perfect fit for these ideas I've had for a long time about a game about environmentalists. Is that what better way? And also, I thought, if I marry environmentalism with werewolves, I might be able to convert all these gamers who like werewolves into a more environmentalist, nature centric, framework. Because a lot of those gamers are not environmentalist types, right? They're like the types that love raging out, you know. So
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, that's the perfect vibe because it's kind of like not what you would think the average werewolf lover would be into, and it gives them a different feel than any other werewolf property, any other IP. Because remember, back then there had been no werewolf stuff that had any kind of culture, right? There's always this lone werewolf on the moors in the full moon, right? There's never a culture.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was just a perfect match for
Um,
me.
yeah, I see. Final phase of the process. Last question.
Okay.
Pen 9, Lost Lord, in the future.
Yeah.
Saint Night World of Lost Lords is described as read about it, as vampire dark ages meet the Witcher with the side of vampire hunter. What does that combination actually mean as a play experience? In your opinion?
Well, Ars Magica invented this idea of the characters sharing a home, and it was called a covenant. And it was basically a castle where you and the other mage characters lived, and you would basically, it gave you something to protect, it gave you something place to hide, it gave you some place to call your own, and a place to start and stop and end every story, right? So it became a character in itself. So in Fang Night, you have a firehold that is your castle. And in this world, there is no masquerade. Vampires are recognized and seen as a part of the world. And the only reason they're allowed to exist and not, attacked by every living being is that they build their fireholds on top of a maw, on top of a hellhole. And so they're inside out castles. Their biggest walls surround the hellhole. And this hellhole is a hole that basically goes into the ground. And after thousands of levels of dungeons and caverns and everything, it literally ends up in hell, the inferno. And so there are two sides to the hellhole. There's the smoke side, where the smoke from hell comes up, and there's the cold side, where the air from the earth goes down. And so there's a whole ecology of this. And basically, your job is to protect this hellhole and protect the world from it. But also, vampires are kind of the university system. All nobles are required to send one noble child to be educated by the vampires, and so they have these noble hostages who are trained at the firehold, and sometimes some of them are made into vampires, so they're connected to the noble class. The noble class doesn't like them, but if you have a relative who's a vampire, well, that's good for you, right? For your family. It's like having a priest, a cousin who's a priest. It's kind of useful sometimes because that priest might become a bishop, and then it's really useful to your family. And so they're basically part of the medieval world, and so not only can you explore, of course, the hellhole and do combat stuff in this giant thing, it's called an abysma. It's this enormous dungeon that goes down, right? It may only be a few miles wide, but it's thousands and thousands of levels. So it's a world unto itself, this abysma. And we have a whole ecology. It's all worked out how it works. But you can explore the world, and the world itself is very complicated politically. So just like Vampire the Masquerade, there's a whole political side of the game, which is very intricate. And then in the cities, they have mask holds where vampires aren't really allowed in the cities, but they have secret fire holds called mask holds. So that's where you can have a more Vampire the Masquerade type experience if you want to play a game in the city.
You are offering Saint Night as an open playtest. What are you
Sign up.
actually What are you actually trying to learn from this game?
Well, we're trying to learn to perfect the world and the rules. Basically, this is a late stage of the playtest, so this is like the proofreading stage, right? We're probably not going to change anything really big, but we're trying to make sure that the rules are really, really, really aimed in. It's like Vampire the Masquerade is. It's very, very simple rules. Trying to keep it very, very simple, and they're even more simple in some ways, but enough rules so that people can kind of do the full fantasy thing. So we have, for instance, we have a page of rules. It's only a couple paragraphs, but it's a page of rules for like mass combat. So you can do armies. So it uses the basic combat system, but you can do armies fighting each other. We have a page of mounted combat, of course, but we want to. The more people who play test your rules, the better they get. And most role playing games fix the problems in the second edition. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to fix them in the first edition. So without it's fixed already, right? I'm too old to send out a flawed game, you know?
Okay, Mark. Last question. Um, you were on the board of directors of Wizards of the Coast when Magic the Gathering launched. That's a remarkable place to be at a remarkable moment. What was that like?
I mean, we all knew it was going to be big, but we didn't know it was going to be this big. Like, we sold that company for $1 billion, just almost $1 billion to Hasbro. And what's amazing is that was way too little. We should never have sold it. It would been worth way more money now. They make over $1 billion a year for Magic and D&D. Magic and D&D make up most of the profits of Hasbro. So yeah, basically, I thought it was going to be this big game that would sell, that would be big for a couple of years, but Magic still sells. It sells incredibly well every year. We never should have sold it. It was actually, when we sold it, it was actually worth $10 billion. Shame on us. Shame on us. But who knew? Hindsight is 2020.
Okay, Mark. This was the last question. I thank you very much for this terrific journey in your history, and the history of Vampire Masquerade and your legacy. I hope you will come again and you come and visit us in this podcast another time. Maybe we can spend time also in TV. It's been a genuine honor to have you on the podcast. And, you know, Vampire the Masquerade is not just a game of play. It's part of our culture nowadays. So, thank you. Thank you to all our listeners, our viewers, for all the answers in this podcast. And goodbye.